Another Friday morning. So it's been. Oh, hold on. Let me make sure. I just realised I haven't turned my mic on. That was novel. Just check everything. Speaker, mic. There we go. All right. So that should be the correct microphone. Right. Another Friday morning, and it's been a funny week. It's half term, so the kids have been around and at home. My daughter has got A levels, so she spent time between going out and seeing friends and obviously revising. So that's kind of been interesting. I've been a bit of a taxi driver, so the usual stuff. But then this week, when I have had a chance to sort of sit down and do some writing, I've been thinking about a lot more about the invisible influence, which I've talked about previously. I'm actually in the middle of creating a program around that. So I will share more about that when I've got that finalized and finished. Some of it, if you are a member of the Strategic Den, which is like my monthly membership thing, then you'll get access to those training programs. I'm just going to put them out in the Den module by module over a series of months so that you can obviously build up. And then, as I said before, I may look to build, I got my coffee, by the way. I may look to build a coaching program on the back of that, and we'll see where we go with that. Interestingly enough, I thought this week we talk as well about building a fan base, which ties in nicely with the invisible influence. But I thought specifically if we talk about it in terms of having an audience, because obviously if you have an audience existing that already know you, that like you and trust you, then if you bring out a new product or a new program, then you've already got a fan base to promote to. And certainly I would say, pre-pandemic, and I certainly got into a habit, particularly with external promoters when we're doing a lot of live events, where I was relying on the promoter to obviously provide the audience. So I wasn't as focused on building a fan base in the sense of I would just turn up. There'd be an audience there ready. It didn't matter what country it was. It didn't matter how cold the audience was. I knew I was going to get a good result. And I knew that there would be a percentage of the audience that would love what I do, love how I do it, love me in terms of the sense of my style, my positioning, my branding. So that was all fine. Since the pandemic started, of course, and that kind of changed. And yes, as much as I've done a lot of webinars online where I've used other people's audiences, it came to my mind more apparent and more important that you need to be able to build your own audience. And then, of course, as you dive into that, then there are things you learn along the way. In the sense, what I mean by that is there are things that, I sat down and said, okay, this is the plan. This is what I want to do over the next X number of months. This is how I'm going to do it. But of course, no plan survives the light of day. So once you get into it, then you learn things, you get feedback, and of course, your plan evolves. So in the beginning, it was like, well, okay, what's the fastest way to build any kind of fan base? Would be to run adverts. Now, of course, you then get detracted, or certainly I got distracted. And what I mean by that is, instead of sticking to my original plan, I thought, okay, I'll do what everyone else does, which is run adverts where I'm just immediately selling something. And of course, the good aspect of that is it means you can start generating some revenue. The downside of it is because you immediately start generating revenue, if you're doing it right, of course, because you start immediately generating some revenue, it's easy to get caught in the trap of, okay, this is all I need to do. Whereas actually the smarter move, and I'm kind of realizing this as much for myself, and I'm reminding myself as much as I'm reminding you as well, is that, a few months into that, it was like, actually the smarter move is to build a fan base. That's always the smart move. Yesterday I was sitting down, and when I'm writing a new campaign, then I allow time to be creative. It's important. I think I've mentioned this before. Like, you got to make time for greatness. You then got to make time to implement that greatness. But then within that, I've mentioned before, in my typical routines in the month, there is a section of the month which is all about creativity, and it's important. So, I'm in the middle of writing a campaign. I'm in the middle of putting together a campaign where it's purely built around creating a fan base who are customers. So within that fan base, there will be, I want a strong percentage of that fan base, in fact, as in more of them, over 50% of them, to be immediate customers. And that can just be a small product. But what I've been working on is, okay, what's the campaign? So what's the top of funnel, which ties in with the invisible influence stuff? And then what's the middle of the funnel in terms of what offers do you make to that audience? And so what I've learned is that actually within that, rather than me trying to work out, oh, this is the best offer, I've gone back to the analogy of leaves on a tree. It's like, well, let's have multiple offers, because one offer might appeal to someone within that core audience more than another offer based on where they are right now. Now, of course, this means you got to go back to fundamentals. In fact, I wrote down a couple of notes, which is just reinforcing some of the messages I'm sure you've heard before from me and from other people, which is this idea that in order to build a fan base, you got to know who that fan base is. In other words, you got to have some idea of who you want your audience to be. Like, what are their interests that are relevant to what you want to promote? So if you look at it in terms of the entrepreneurial space, there are, like, for example, if we break down the entrepreneurial space into online entrepreneurs, then within that, you could break it down further, and you could look at it and you could say purely people who do coaching. You could look at it in terms of people and say, well, people who purely do, so for example, sell information products, that would be another audience. You could look at it and say people that just do affiliate marketing. So they never create a product of their own. They never create a service of their own. They're just purely focused on building a fan base so they can promote relevant products to. And of course, as an affiliate, their audience could be a health audience, could be an entrepreneurial audience, doesn't really matter. But from an entrepreneurial audience base, from my perspective, those are different audience, all within that umbrella of entrepreneurial space, entrepreneurial type people. I mean, you go further, you could break it down and look at people who have their own, who do e-commerce. So that would be another entrepreneurial type audience. So the first part of understanding who your fan base is really being clear who it is you want as your fans, who are likely to most benefit. That's the word I'm looking for, to most benefit from what you're offering. So this week I've been building sort of campaigns around that, because I know who I want in my fan base. I know who I've been building in my fan base. I know how I want to expand it. And really the other side of it is I want to do it smartly. So this brings us back to paid advertising. Paid advertising, and again, I keep reinforcing this, isn't just the fastest way to build any kind of fan base. It's also smart because you get the benefit of the AI. So Facebook's AI is fantastic at finding the right people for you. Google's AI is fantastic at finding the right people for you. You can help it along the way, and maybe we'll talk about that as we get into this further. But you don't get that from an organic point of view. Like, organic reach is just deteriorating for the simple matter that obviously all of these platforms want to make money and need to make money. So they've got to do it one way. YouTube, of course, if you notice YouTube, they're still running a lot of ads. They're now running typically 2 ads immediately when you try and launch a video. So instead of just having one ad that runs pre-roll, they've now got 2 ads that run pre-roll, and they're slightly different. Facebook is doing the same. I mean, they still obviously make money from their advertising. And then organic reach is down because actually YouTube is where I was going. YouTube are also looking to sell a subscription base. So you see, you've seen it yourself, been on YouTube. They're offering YouTube, I forget what they're calling it now, YouTube Plus or something, I don't know. But anyway, it's some sort of subscription base, and they're getting into the production arena. So they're creating their own TV shows, which are unique to YouTube. So they're doing similar to what Amazon have done, similar to what Netflix have done, similar to what Sky do. So they're all going down that path. Anyway, key point, first of all, is know your audience. So decide who you want as your fan base. Then within that, you're then going, okay, well, what's going to attract that fan base? So then you're into, okay, you got to understand what their problems are, what they're facing, what their desires are, what sort of goals they want to achieve. And then you're into messaging. So from a fan base point of view, you're looking at, can you provide content that engages? So I've broken this down to little e's, that engages, entertains. I think entertainment is a massively important factor in any content that you put out these days. I'm not saying that everybody is naturally an entertainer, but I am saying that the more you can entertain, hold on, I'm just checking my internet. This all seems fine. The more you can entertain, the better. And that could just be going back to telling stories. Stories will never cease to be entertaining to human beings because that's what we're built around. So that's all kind of like, if nothing else, just turn everything you do into a story, which I've mentioned before. So engage, entertain, and then ideally educate, because educating puts you in a position where there's a reason to follow you. Like if you're purely a stand-up comic, then obviously your whole focus is entertaining and making people laugh, and that gives them a reason to continue following you. And you'll have seen from some of my posts over the last few weeks. You know, there's a couple of comedians I've come across online that I've sort of shared their content because it's made me laugh. So yes, that's important. But from our point of view as coaches, as people who are selling information products, then we need to position ourselves in a way where what we're doing gives people a reason to continue to follow us, continue to watch us. And that's primarily driven by the kind of content, educational content, that you can provide. If you just give educational content and it's dry, then yes, people will go like, well, that's good, but they're not necessarily going to continue to follow you. You know, there are a number of people that I've seen that don't resonate for me, not because their content isn't good. It's good, but, and this is, I'm thinking this through as I'm talking to you now, it's good, but it's not massively different to what I hear from other people. So therefore, there's nothing predominantly unique within it. And there's nothing unique within it which is massively relevant to me. So I think those keys are important. It's like highlight what's unique in what you do. And then the other side of it is they don't entertain. So I think if their content was so valuable, then I would not care too much about the entertainment factor. And I think on an emotional level, like from the psychology point of view, this is very much, if their content was so valuable and unique, then it would trigger that sort of growth need, that emotional growth need that we all have. So I would feel that I was learning something that was helping develop me as a person, helping me sort of grow, and therefore it would be worth continuing to follow them. But if you're not in that position, and it's not always easy to get that, it's not always easy to clarify exactly what it is that is unique about what you do, certainly not in the beginning. And like there are times where, you know, I'll spend time on content that I'm developing and I'm looking for unique angles and this, that, and the other. And then there's times where I do like I'm doing now, which is where I've got a thought and I want to explore it. And I just think, well, let's use a live as a way to explore this topic, explore this concept. And that's really what I'm doing. So therefore, within that, as I'm thinking out loud, and hopefully benefiting you as well as benefiting me, as I'm thinking out loud, there's like their content, if it isn't going to be massively unique, then it's got to be educational to a point where people go, I like this, this is useful to me, but also make it so entertaining or entertaining enough where they go, I would listen to this person again. Does that make sense? So you've got a couple of things going there. And I know some people might think, well, I'm more of an introvert. How do I deliver content that's entertaining? I know plenty of introverts who are great speakers. And so if that gives you a good reference in the sense of being a great speaker, people naturally think that all great speakers are extroverts. They're not at all. I would say it's not even remotely biased. It's not like it's weighted towards extroverts and there's only a few introverts. I would say it's slapped down the middle. You know, I mean, obviously an extrovert, introvert is a spectrum. It's not a digital on or off. But I would say within that, even if you think you're introverted, a lot of the great speakers I know, and I'm what's called ambivert. So I'm somewhere on the scale. I'm probably slightly more extrovert than introvert, but I'm not massively extrovert. But a lot of great speakers are introverts. So in terms of being entertaining, it's got nothing to do with whether you're introverted or extroverted. That's purely to do with just develop your ability to tell stories. You know, and the way to do that is just to tell more stories, come up with more stories. You know, it's a bit like if you look at, say, actors. I was thinking, for example, that Robert Downey Jr. You know, if you see him in the movies, in Iron Man and so on, fantastic, very charismatic on screen. And certainly, therefore, when he's interviewed, you know, he can be very charismatic again. And he's built a great following based on that charisma. So it's like, what is it about you that you could lean on as a strength that would allow you to be more engaging, more entertaining? But always within that, to leverage entertainment, to leverage engagement, to leverage charisma would be to tell stories. So I always come back to that. It's like, just tell more stories, learn, and the best way to do that is osmosis. I remember years ago, I was doing an event and I wanted to make sure that I was a little more kind of, like I wanted to put more humor into my presentations. And so one of the things I did in the early days was I just literally sat down and watched stand-up comics. You know, so I watched a lot of Billy Connolly because I just watched people that really made me laugh. So I went through them all. You know, it's like there are certain people that are very dry, like Jack D, I think his name is. Jack D, from my point of view, he's okay, but he's very dry. So that didn't appeal to me as much, whereas a Billy Connolly really appealed to me. It really resonated with me and how I am. So I watched a lot of Billy Connolly, and it wasn't even from a pure, you know, from a modeling point of view. It wasn't like I was sitting there going, well, analyzing everything he did. there were a few patterns that I noticed along the way, but it was more about osmosis. It's like, well, if I watch more of this, then hopefully some of it will seep in. And then when I'm on stage in front of an audience, I'll be naturally more funny. And it seemed to work. It's like when you have an audience, there's that instant feedback of whether they laugh or not. So certain things work, certain things don't, which, I've talked about before. You don't really get that on camera because, of course, I don't get any feedback. So I don't necessarily know whether people are laughing or not. So, it's like, do that. If you want to learn to tell more stories, watch people who are great at telling stories. So watch a Billy Connolly. He's brilliant at telling stories. Watch, who else do I think is great at telling stories? I can't think of anybody else off my head. I can think of a couple of comedians, but I wouldn't necessarily they're in sort of Billy Connolly's league when he was on form. Richard Bandler, for example, I mentioned before, one of the co-founders of NLP. If you get a chance to watch him, if you can find some of his videos, then again, watch him because he's very funny. All he does is tell stories. It's very, very funny. Don't listen to him in the car, though. Not while you're driving or operating any heavy machinery. He has a habit of putting people in trance. So do all of that just to kind of grow your ability to be more engaging, more entertaining when you're on camera. So the key things then are, okay, who do you want to go for? Who's the audience you're after? Even in the beginning, if you're not entirely clear, like we've been working on a campaign with a client over the last couple of weeks. And he'd had somebody running adverts for him before. And so I could see the audiences they'd selected before, and they were very broad. They were like sort of entrepreneurial, personal development type audiences, which are interests you can select within Facebook, but they're extremely broad interests. So within that, I was like, can we narrow that down? And again, this is like, can you help the algorithm? And the more I watched of his material, the more I spoke to him about the people that had bought his products in the past, the more it's like, okay, look, there's a little deeper insight to this, as in, these people are not just entrepreneurial. In fact, I wouldn't even think they describe themselves as entrepreneurial. They certainly are interested in making more money, and they're certainly interested in perhaps being able to get out of work, doing the kind of work they're doing, which they're not enjoying. But they're much more spiritually minded as well, which is often a reflection of the person who is, owns the business. So within that, it was like, okay, look, let's focus on spiritual audiences. And that produced a massive return. So within that, it was like, okay, once you start thinking spiritual audiences, like, okay, so who are the more spiritual authors? Who are the more spiritual people? So we're into the Wayne Dyers of this world, the Michael Beckwiths of this world, so it was like drilling down into that, and that worked extremely well. So think about your audience, think about the things you're interested in, because that's a good place to start, because I can guarantee, therefore, the people you attract will have similar interests to you. So look at it in those terms. And then obviously look at it in terms of, okay, the result they're trying to achieve that you can help them with, whether that's eliminating stress, whether that's being able to get over phobias, whether that's being able to help them generate more revenue in their business or start a business, whatever it might be. Obviously think in those terms. Then in the beginning, I would say, think of some stories you want to share. Think of, the way I do it is I start with what is the insight that I want to share. So from an educational point of view, what's the insight? And then I think about a story that I could use to highlight that insight. Then the big thing in terms of a story, that if you want to make the story bigger, so it's still sharing the same insight, but making the story longer, so it's more engaging for a longer period of time, is recognize that any insight you ever have in your life will not be the result of necessarily a single event. It's a result of multiple events over a period of time. So what that means is you have a timeline. And if you were to go back through your past, then you would notice that you've got different events through history that brought you to where you are now. So therefore, you can tie all of those individual events together because they're all connected by that one insight. So that then gives you a bigger story. So in other words, you could tell the story of 4 different events that happened to in your life, which all lead you to the same insight. So then, or you could tell one little story about one event that led you to an insight. So that's a short story. But if you want to make it longer, then just tell 4 stories from 4 separate events, which could be separated by time, or which will be separated by time. When that time frame could be a month, could be a year, could be 10 years. Like when I sit down and think about insights I want to share, and I start thinking about, okay, relevant stories from my history, personal stories are always better. When I start thinking about relevant stories from my history, then I always go back and start looking at it in terms of, okay, and I'll start thinking about things that have happened 20 years ago and go, actually, that's relevant. So I might have a story from 20 years ago, a story from 10 years ago, a story from 6 months ago. and a story from a month ago, and yet all of those tie together to share the same insight because they're all connected by the same lesson. So that's another way to help develop stories, just off the top of my head for you. And the other key thing is you want to polarize your audience. You want to have something within, something that you feel strongly about, which ties into this idea of what do you stand for, what do you stand against. Something you feel strongly about that you want to share that would immediately polarize your audience. In other words, it would turn some people off completely, so it would repel them. But in doing so, what I will tell you is the more you can repel certain types of people, the flip side of that will love you even more. So in other words, the people that like you will really like you, and they will like even more because you dislike or repel the same people they dislike or don't want to have any time for. Like, people are looking for get rich quick, for example. That's a simple example. But within that, then, I've got no time for people who just want to get rich quick because it never works that way. But by highlighting that, or even highlighting that and sharing stories about how much I dislike it, then I again turn those people off. So the people are going, well, I don't agree with you. There's got to be a faster way of doing things. I'm not interested in you. Great, gone. I don't have to deal with them as customers. I don't have to deal with them with prospects because they're just going to be a pain in the ass. But what it does do is the flip side of it, people go, yeah, I agree. It takes some real effort to grow a real business. And it does. Obviously, it's hard work and it's going to take a bit of time. And there is no easy path. There are easier paths, as in there are ways to avoid costly mistakes by obviously getting advice and coaching and mentoring from people who've been and done something similar to what you want to achieve. But there is no easy path, none whatsoever. That just doesn't happen. As human beings, I think perhaps we have an innate desire to at times make things more tricky, more difficult. But also the other side of it is that's, I guess, how you learn is the fact that you face certain challenges. And you will face challenges. Errol used to say that to me on a regular basis. He used to say to any audience whenever he was speaking as well, was this idea of you will face multiple challenges. And you've got to decide in advance, is what you're after worth the challenge? Like, if I translate that into, I guess, some more of the sort of Bushido type analogies or spirits from the Japanese, it's this idea of a worthy opponent. So effectively, you are going to face challenges. You could look at it as the challenges are looking for a worthy opponent. Are you a worthy opponent? Because you're going to have to deal with those challenges in order to get the business that you want. So that's one way of polarizing. But there'll be other ways. It's like if you were in the corporate world, then you could well polarize. And I don't know a huge amount about corporate because I've tended to avoid staying out of it. But the reason I've stayed out of it is because more often than not, corporate has an inbuilt hierarchy. Therefore, you have someone who's in a position of leadership simply because they're higher up in the hierarchy than obviously the people below them. But they abuse that position. In other words, they're not necessarily the best person for the leadership role. They might be the best person for the technical role. But then they get into this situation where it's like they're trying to command people and tell them what to do simply because they're in that position. They're at that level in the hierarchy, which doesn't always necessarily lead to having the greatest culture, the greatest work environment, the most productive work environment. So you could polarize against, and you often get people in those positions who think they know it all. Like, I know the little bit of corporate I've done, and I've got friends who do corporate. So talking to them, there's often this challenge with someone who has to run a team who then wants to develop that team, but actually what they don't want, they think the team needs development, but they don't think they do. So you could polarize against that. It's like, you could talk about you don't want to work with people, or the people that think they don't need development, the people that think it's only their team that need development. Those kind of people are a nightmare. So do you really want to work with them? So that would be another way of polarizing in a corporate example. So then, all right, let's move this on a little bit. So look, we're going to build a fan base. Then you've got two ways of building a fan base. Once you know who it is you want to fan, you can either go the organic route. That's slow. But if you were going to go the organic route, then I would suggest as a strategy, start looking for people that you could exchange lists with. What I mean by that is look for other influencers in the same pond, in the same pool, that would be, in other words, people who've already got the kind of people who would make good prospects for you, good fans for you. And look to see if you can either get on their podcast. So if people do podcasts, can you get interviewed on their podcast? I've had people reach out to me a couple of times over the years And I've done podcasts, haven't done many recently, but when people have reached out, I tend to do them just because you think, yeah, it'd be kind of fun. And who knows where it will go. So, but I've never specifically thought, let's go find people with good podcasts, kind of get on their show. And that would be a great strategy. Now, what I would say is if you're starting out and you're thinking, well, I've got nothing, I haven't got my own first of all, if you're going to get on podcasts, it's probably worth you doing your own podcast as well so you can reciprocate. But in the beginning, and this is no different to starting out as a speaker, really, or wanting to be able to get on people's stages. In the beginning, look for people who've got a small following because they're more likely to say yes. They're probably looking for guests. Like I think one of the big challenges people have on podcasts is finding guests. So you can solve that problem by offering yourself as a guest. So again, make sure you do your research. Make sure you're clear about, okay, I want to go on that person's podcast because I've got something that's relevant to their audience. In other words, you can bring value. You can add something to their audience, make them look good. Like one of the keys in getting yourself invited as a guest on somebody else's podcast show is that you want to make the host look good. So start there. So look with people who are kind of maybe starting out, who've got a small audience so that you can get on their show, do a great show with them, then leverage that show, then start sharing that, obviously, because by sharing it, one, you're helping promote them, but also you're helping promote yourself. So one, that starts to give you more exposure. It'll be slow in the beginning. What you will get, because I am aware now that there are people that spend their whole business is finding guests for podcast hosts. And also the flip side of that is they're finding podcasts hosts for guests. So they work both ways. So I know there are people that do that specifically as a business. So it might be worth reaching out to them as well. But what you'll find is as you start sharing more and more of the podcasts that you're doing, then you will get more of these people reaching out to you saying, oh, by the way, I've got this podcast show. Would you like to come on it? And I've had a few of those, like through LinkedIn, through Facebook. I've had people reach out and say, oh, by the way, I've got a client who runs this podcast. Would you like to be interviewed? So I've done a number of those things. And then they go off and share it. And I just always say to them, look, send me the link and I'll share it on mine as well. So as I say, I haven't done many recently, but I have done some over the years. And I think if you were to say, I want to do an organic strategy that's going to give me a good return for my effort, that, in my opinion, would be a great strategy to follow, to really kind of drill down into it, give it some focus, and just go for, okay, I want to get on podcasts. Obviously, don't start by going, okay, day one, I want to get on Joe Rogan's podcast. That's not going to happen unless you're somehow on his radar and you've got a great book out that's relevant to him or somebody. Typically when I listen to Joe, I would say a lot of the people on his show are people that other people he's had on his show have recommended to him. So networking, again, it all works. But I would say start out, look for people, like there's loads of podcasts out there. I mean, there's millions of these things. They're all looking for guests. So start with some of the smaller ones that are relevant to you. So if you're in the health and fitness space, look for people who've got health and fitness or related types of podcasts and start dropping them an email saying, I've got this. I'd like to share, come on your podcast and talk about this. I feel it'd be useful to your audience. What do you think? So just do that, reach out. That's always a good way. If you've got a book or something like that, then that's another way of reaching out and say, look, I've just written this book. I'd like to give all of your audience a free copy. I'd like to do that. Maybe we can set up a podcast and we talk about what's content in the book and I give out and I allow you to then say, we're giving out a free copy or whatever. So many ways of doing that to kind of invoke reciprocation. So that's one thing. Then as you do podcasts, as I say, start sharing them and then start going for slightly bigger. So on the back of that, you'll start building your own audience. That allows you to then go to someone who's got a slightly bigger audience with their podcast. And then again, from that, then you go slightly bigger. So you kind of step by step by step. And I would suggest also, as I say, run your own podcast in association with it and start inviting those people back on your show and then just watch it grow. And I think that could work really well. I think along the way, if you start reaching out to people who maybe got big followings on YouTube, for example, in spaces that are relevant, like it costs nothing in terms of time, energy, effort, or anything else to drop somebody a message. And if they don't respond, send them a message a month later. There's nothing to be lost by doing that. In the same way that I know there are people that, from a coaching perspective, their focus each day is to, find Facebook groups that might have their audience in it, that might have their potential customers in it, and they'll just kind of look through it and they drop people a direct message. They'll send a direct message to somebody to reach out if they think they have a problem that they can solve. So no different. I mean, what you're doing here is just saying, okay, like podcast people, can I reach out to them? Can I keep sending them a message? If they don't respond immediately, can I send a message again in the future? So as that grows, then obviously you're going to need to be a little bit organized with it so you can stay on top of it. Some sort of spreadsheet or CRM system. But, that would be a viable strategy to grow your audience base and to get you started in the beginning. Then once you've got a big enough audience, then you can start promoting your products and services. Now, the challenge with that approach is, one, it's going to take some time. So make sure you've got some income coming in whilst you're doing that. And two, you're not directly necessarily making money straight away. My second and my personal favorite is, again, go down the advertising route. So in this case, top of the funnel, you're creating content. So it could be a live stream like this, and then you're promoting it. So you're spending money to promote that. You're thinking about the audiences that would most benefit from what you offer. And so you're targeting those audiences within the Facebook advertising platform. Similar, you can do exactly the same on YouTube, by the way. And then, of course, you're just building up the viewer base. So the people that watch, say, on Facebook, they talk about through plays, which is 15 seconds. And remember, people will form an opinion within 3 seconds. So you don't need people to watch the whole video to be relevant to you. So, build up an audience of people who've watched at least 15 seconds. Track the people that watch, all of it, 25% of it, and so on. And that's a way to build that audience. And then what's valuable about that is once that audience grows, you start getting beyond 1,000 people, then middle of the funnel, you could immediately start running ads which are making small offers. So that could be offers to come on a web class, on a webinar. So obviously on the webinar, you then promote your products or your services. Or it could be literally sending them to a course. So it could be a course and you're just immediately promoting the course. And you can test any kind of price you want, from £49, $49 all the way up to $3,000, $4,000, $1,000. I mean, just test it. Personally, if you're going to sell something in the $1,000 mark, then I would potentially say you're better off doing some sort of webinar. So do that. And that would be my preferred way of doing it, because what will happen is you'll get through plays quite cheaply, like 3-4 cents a time. So to get to 1,000 through plays is fairly straightforward and fairly cheap. And you just keep running it. Like you could run a $10 a day strategy on that. Just keep coming up with new content. Then the middle of the funnel, you're kind of going, okay, I want multiple offers. Like I'm writing a campaign and that I've been focused on this week with my creative week, where it's very much about, okay, look, I've got 4 different things I want to promote. So again, leaves on the tree, which offer will resonate with which person based on where they are now. If I've only got one offer for my audience, then there's only going to be a certain percentage of that audience that will resonate with at any given time. But if I've got 4 different offers, which are all slightly different angles on different problems, but they all face potentially, then I can hit them at different times, like different places in their journey, if you like. So there could be people in my audience who are just starting out. There could be people in my audience who've just got to their first challenge, people in my audience who are at their second challenge. And so I've got different offers for different challenges. And then I'll let Facebook decide which is the right offer to show those people. I mean, again, that's leveraging the algorithm again, leaning into the AI. So I can do it that way. And the beauty of that, of course, is done right, then you will start selling products, and even selling a front end, $49 product, which when they buy, you've got a couple of upsells behind it, which are built into the funnel. Then you can start seeing that you could overall, on average, be making $100, $200, $300 per customer that comes through straight up front, right in the beginning. So like literally you're cash flow positive and profitable straight from the beginning. So you're not waiting to acquire somebody as a customer and then waiting 30 days or 90 days before you're actually in profit. You can be in profit right at the beginning of the funnel. So that's my preferred way of doing it. So that's kind of, I thought I'll keep this short. It is half term. So that's my preferred way. It's like, so just to kind of quick recap, if you are going to build your fan base, 1, know who you want as your audience. That's the starting point. Secondly, you then need to build that audience. You need to build your base. 2 ways of doing that. Organic way, I would suggest as a strategy, go the podcast route. So what that means is in the beginning, look to be a guest on other people's podcasts. So literally cold message them. Find people, because I know there are people now that their whole business is about finding guests for podcast hosts and finding hosts for podcast guests. So reach out to some of them. Because I've had people reach out to me saying, I've got this client, they've got this podcast, they'd like to have you as a guest. Would you be happy to come on it? And I always say yes. It's like, what does a podcast take? An hour or so, if that? and it's always fun. I always enjoy talking, so that's always fun as well. So do that. I would suggest as well, if you've got it in you, start your own podcast so that you can reciprocate. As you start at the bottom, start with people with a small audience because they're desperate for guests, so they will more likely take you. As you grow that, share those interviews on your organic channels, and then leverage that to get to be a guest on somebody with a slightly bigger audience, and just step up. That will grow your fan base. Once you've got a decent fan base, then you can start promoting your products. So again, that's going to take time. You need an income in the beginning. Or you can actually, just thinking about this isn't a recap, I'm just adding to this. What you can do is when you go on a podcast, if you've got something like a book that you could offer for free, so say to the podcast host, look, I'd like to come on your show. I've got this, I think it'd be great value. I've just come out with this new book. We can talk about it. That'll be a value to your audience. And at the end of it, if you want, you can tell your audience they can have a copy for free on you. And so it makes you look good. So that might be one way of doing it. Now, of course, those people could come to a landing page where they have to put in their email details to get the book and download it for free. And then, of course, on the back of that, you could make an offer straight away. So you could be selling a small product. So you could make money. That it would be one way to monetize that immediately. The other way, of course, is to run paid ads. So again, top of funnel, focus on your content, focus on putting out content which engages, entertains, and educates, and then use that to build an audience. And then, of course, that audience is now a custom audience inside Facebook or YouTube or any of these platforms. And then your middle of the funnel is immediately saying to that audience, promote directly to that audience and make an offer. So my suggestion is have more than one offer. So have maybe 3-4 different offers based on 3 or 4 of the different challenges your audience face trying to hit their goals, and then just run that in one ad set. So let Facebook's algorithm decide which offer to put to which person at what time. Different people who are at different stages in their journey will respond differently to different offers. You get to maximize all of that, and you make profit straight away. So they buy your front end product. You can immediately have some upsells in the funnel. So you could get to an average customer acquisition value where you're making $100, $200 per customer you acquire right up front, right at the beginning. So you're cash flow positive, which gives you massive potential, massive leverage, which is my whole strategy. It's like my whole focus is getting people to that place. And quick advert, the Invisible Influence coaching program I'm going to be bringing out is all focused on building that funnel, getting you to a place where you are making profit up front as you acquire customers. In other words, you're getting paid to acquire customers up front. All right, that's me done for today. As I say, it's half term. Plus, it's my daughter's 18th birthday on Monday, so we're doing preparations for that as well. Wow, 18. So I will see you next week. I hope this has been of value. Yes, I've been in a slightly different position in the house because obviously with half term, the kids are all around, so I had to kind of move around a little bit. But hopefully this has been useful to you. Hope you've enjoyed it. Hope you got some value out of it. So share it with your friends. I will catch you next time. All right, ciao.